Greetings everyone, here we go for our first lecture going through the, the interwebs as they say. So anyway, we're going to zip along and start talking about reinforcement. You may hear some weird sounds in the background. I am in my office, so people will knock on the door and things like that will go off. My email and things will make all sorts of noises. I'll try to keep those to a minimum. I'll edit things out that are extremely disruptive. So we're going to start talking about reinforcement. Again, this is kind of rehashing what we talked about in 324, but with a slightly different application here. So we're going to look at it in terms of the overall utility of it for behavior modification. So let's move on. All right, simple definition right off the bat. Any stimulus added or removed. I'm going to use my little cursor here and say, make sure you understand that part. Added or removed. So that's going to be our key to negative or positive reinforcement. So any stimulus added or removed contingent upon a behavior that maintains or increases the strength of the behavior. If you're not familiar with what the term contingent means, then look it up, because that is the absolute biggest criteria with regard to reinforcement. So a stimulus is just anything that can be detected, right? So it could be a feeling, it could be an experience that you have, it could be a visual stimulus, it could be a tactile one, it could be an auditory one, it could be a consumatory one, so something like food, right? Food is often used in the animal world, and sometimes used in the human world, but we often do anything as a reinforcer, anything that works, really. So let's look at how this thing is organized, and it's organized in the form of what we call a three-term contingency. So there's that three-term contingency. This is going to pop up throughout the quarter, and this is how we actually start to describe behavior as a whole. We have an SD, which, as some of you may remember, is a discriminative stimulus. Right? We'll talk heavily about discriminative stimuli later, but in reality what they are is just cues. They're just environmental cues. Oftentimes it is just the environment as a whole. Then the R, okay, which is your response or the behavior, and then SR, which is notation for reinforcement. So let's read this in a slightly different way. We're going to say a stimulus that discriminates, then a response, then a stimulus that reinforces. Right? So that is our three-term contingency in a nutshell. Again, we're going to use that with all sorts of different notation, but that is pretty much how behavior functions. The discriminative stimulus right here will actually signal to the organism that a particular response will be reinforced. So the power of the three-term contingency here, in terms of which section of it is the most powerful, is actually this one, the consequence. So the consequences of behavior are the most important in this three-term contingency. Right? So this is how operant behavior looks when we put it on to this type of, I don't want to say graph, but you get the idea. If we write it down shorthand, this is how operant behavior is. So operant behavior is, again, kind of paraphrasing your book and previous lectures, is just anything that you do. All right, and by that I mean anything that you do that's a voluntary behavior. Respondent conditioning, the classical conditioning stuff, covers the reflexes, but this is a little different than that. All right. Reinforcement is a law. Right? This is one of those things that sometimes people get, sometimes they don't. So I'm going to beat it over your head a little bit here. We're talking about a law at the level of gravity. People don't argue with gravity. People don't argue with how that stuff works. Right? Reinforcement has the same sort of scientific backing behind it. It's that clear. This is what is happening. This is how behavior is being modified. This is what is, again, as the definition says, it maintains or increases the strength of a behavior. So we're thinking about the frequency of behavior. We're thinking about whether or not it's going to continue, those types of things. So it is a law. In the past, you may have heard of something called the matching law, which is from, what's his name? Thorndike. But he kind of missed the boat on a couple of things, and it's really beyond the scope of this course to look at what he missed the boat on. But this is the law of reinforcement as Skinner discovered it. And I'm not going to say invented it or wrote it, because it was literally more of a discovery through a ton of experimentation, as you guys remember from 324. Let's keep moving. Different types of reinforcers, right? So the first type of reinforcer here is positive reinforcement. Now, when we talk about positive and negative reinforcement, remember there is no such thing as good or bad. Positive does not mean good. It has no moral value. Negative does not mean bad. It has no moral value. We are talking about a stimulus being added which is positive, or a stimulus being removed, which is negative. So, the definition of positive reinforcement: contingently adding a stimulus following a behavior to strengthen or maintain a behavior. You can think of this as getting something, right? Now, people often think that reinforcement means you're getting money, you're getting food, or something like that. No, this could be as simple as I'm going to flip the light switch and the lights come on. When those lights come on, something was added, all right? The light, okay? So the light in the room was added, and that strengthens or maintains my behavior of flipping a light switch. Let's also look at negative reinforcement, as you see a nice big negative up there. Contingently removing a stimulus following a behavior to strengthen or maintain the behavior. Notice the only difference between these two is adding or removing. Okay? Always, 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 reinforcement strengthens a behavior. That's the only definition of it. It increases behavior. You cannot use reinforcement to remove a behavior, so to speak. And I'm going to add a little caveat there later on in the quarter when we start talking about how to decrease a behavior using particular reinforcement schedules, but that's a little bit beyond where we're at right now. But reinforcement will always, always, always strengthen a behavior, a particular type of behavior. Okay. Again, we're thinking about molar behavior here, so like we talked about, today, as you guys remember, we talked about the differences between molecular and molar behavior. So we're thinking about the molar stuff here, the larger behaviors. Flipping a light switch, there's 18 million different ways you can flip a light switch, but any one of those behaviors would be reinforced by the outcome of that light, of the light actually coming on. So that's what we're talking about positive reinforcement. Negative, a good example of negative reinforcement is like headache. If you've got a headache and you do something and a headache goes away, whatever you did was reinforced by the loss of the headache. We're going to talk more in depth about escape and avoidance later on, which is what negative reinforcement really is. So if you're escaping a stimulus, so you're experiencing something bad, right, and then you do something to get away from that thing, right, and it's successful, that's a negative reinforcement situation. If you are doing something to avoid something bad happening, or something aversive, as we say, then that is a negative reinforcing situation as well. So let's keep moving. Some examples, these are kind of fun. So here's again, these are set up as the three-term contingency here, so as we go through the slide, you'll see how this works. But this first column here is the SDs, the middle column is the response, and the final column is the consequence, and then the descriptor column is what's actually going on. So let's look at this one. Describe reinforcement is the SD, so that's me telling you. So you, right now, describe reinforcement. Okay, you're going to make a response. Hopefully you're making it in this gap here, or not. All right, there it is. So, an increase in behavior, blah, 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 blah. You provide the right definition, right? So, hopefully, you just spoke that correct definition for me, or for the computer here. The consequence is me saying, well done, good job, all right? So, well done, you got the definition of that right. Now, is this positive reinforcement? Is it negative reinforcement? What do you think? Right? So again, look at the situation. The discriminative stimulus was the command or the request to describe reinforcement. The behavior was you providing a response, saying, providing that definition, using a stimulus to increase or using a stimulus to increase or maintain a particular behavior. Right? However you wanted to, get that exact definition in there, and then my response to you or somebody else's response to you, if you got that right, would be well done. So positive or negative, something was added, so it is. Say it with me. Yeah, here we go. Positive, right? So SR plus. Notice there's a little change in notation there. SR and then plus. So a stimulus that reinforces, but this is a positive reinforcer. Right, let's go to the next one. Oh, wrong button. Or this is getting weird. Fun. There we go. So your car is not handling well. Right? So it's kind of shaking. That's your discriminative stimulus. So you take it to the mechanic to get in alignment. That's your behavior, is going to the mechanic, right? That's a really molar thing. You got to drive there and do all that stuff, right? But so getting alignment is the behavior. The consequence is the wobble goes away, right? Bear with me here. I have to answer that phone. Okay, I'm back. All right. So the car's not handling well. You're going to get in alignment, and then that wobble goes away, right? So the consequence of your action is that the wobble goes away. Think about what that consequence is. Is something being added or something being removed? Probably something being removed, right? The wobble itself went away. So what is that going to do to behavior? In the future, if your car is not handling well, right, then you will likely get in alignment. Okay? Again, negative reinforcement. So notice that's not something bad. It's just this is how you describe that process. It's a negatively reinforcing situation. The wobble went away. You escaped the wobble. Okay. These ones are a little different. We're kind of jumping ahead a few chapters here, but I want you to see what's going on in contrast with punishment. So these next two are related to punishers, right? So this one is making curry. So, all right, making curry, but I added too much ginger, right? And it tasted bad. Notice something was added, that bad taste. So here we have a new terminology once again, a stimulus that punishes. So this is a positive punisher because you added a stimulus, right? And likely that's going to decrease the behavior of adding too much ginger in the future. So punishers are about decreasing behavior. Reinforcers are about increasing behavior. Sorry about this, hitting the wrong button there. All right, confirm delete. It's on the computer. You know, your computer asks you this all the time. So confirm delete. You press the yes button because you weren't paying attention. Right? You lose your paper. That's a negatively punishing situation. You lost something and it's going to reduce the behavior. Hopefully you're going to reduce the behavior of pressing yes, or at least reduce the behavior of not paying attention, something like that. But so again, the first two are the really two that we're focusing on for this chapter, but I wanted you to see a little bit about what's coming down the pipe and how how reinforcement is different than punishment. So, a quick summary: reinforcement strengthens behavior. Does not matter if it's positive reinforcement. Does not matter if it's negative reinforcement. Punishment weakens behavior. Again, doesn't matter if it's positive, doesn't matter if it's negative, right? So positive reinforcers, a stimulus is added to strengthen a behavior. Negative reinforcer, a stimulus is removed to strengthen a behavior. So how do we use this stuff? All right. First off, you got to select a behavior. This is what you guys should be working on right now for your assignments, right? Select a particular behavior that you're interested in increasing, all right? Now, there may be something that you're wanting to decrease, I get it, but I'm just using the example right now for the sake of getting through the lecture, right? So, select a behavior. How do we do it? All right, start general. Oftentimes, this is the outcome type of stuff. Being successful. Right, so whatever being successful means, does that mean making a lot of money? Does that mean starting a company? Does that mean helping others? What does it mean? How do you define being successful? So we're going to start general, and then what you do is you actually start to narrow that down. Right? So get extremely specific. So here is an example of one of those: being to work on time. Right? So that's part of being successful. If you show up late, you're going to get fired. All the time, you're going to get fired. Right? So that's not going to contribute to being successful. So start general, get more specific as you go. Right? Break that down into when you say what does successful mean, you're going to identify several behaviors that are associated with that. Right? Those are the things that you're going to then try to strengthen using reinforcement. The same thing goes if you're trying to manage somebody else's behavior, right? So if you're trying to get somebody to be more cooperative, okay, well, that's the general thing. What does that mean? Break that down. Sharing toys, answering emails, whatever it may be, you're going to have to narrow that down to something specific. So again, this is where we start to split out those, what do you call them? The outcomes versus the behaviors, right? So we're going to split out that outcome and break it down into the individual behaviors. There's a certain art to doing this because you might, the first time you do this, you might get overly molecular, okay? And that's okay. You can always strengthen those very finite, those very small responses, if you will, and you'll get the overall outcome. And that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It just becomes a little bit more challenging as you go along, right? Well, how do we choose reinforcers? Well, guess what? Different strokes for different folks. Right? There's no more to it than that. What reinforces you may not reinforce me. What reinforces me may not reinforce, I don't know, let's pick on somebody in the class. Ms. Mack sitting there back in the back side of towards the center of the room. So what is a reinforcer for her may not be reinforcing for Erica. Who knows? The thing is that our learning history has provided us with reinforcers that are available, and we're going to talk about those reinforcers and how they develop when we get into the next chapter. But the thing you need to remember is that you really don't know if something's a reinforcer until you try it out. And there's different categories of reinforcers right here, but again, something's going to be different for everyone, right? But the general categories still exist. Okay, you can have a consumable reinforcer. right? Which is something that you would eat. For me, curry is a great reinforcer, but some other stuff isn't. Brussels sprouts not so much. But Brussels sprouts may be reinforcing to somebody else, right? So you just have this general category of food reinforcers. We call those consumables, right? Activities. According to the picture here, surfing. That may be reinforcing for some people. Probably not so reinforcing for me. I've never really done it, so it's not going to. I assume it's not going to be that reinforcing. It may be because I haven't tried it, and I don't know. And so we always have to take that empirical approach of finding out, is this something that's going to be a reinforcing situation? But again, activities can be reinforcing. For me, spending a lot of time woodworking. I'm a big woodworker. I enjoy it. I do custom stuff all the time. That is something that's very reinforcing. And you can use those types of activities to strengthen other behaviors. I'll talk more about that later on in the quarter. I've got some really good examples for that. Right? Manipulative, right? Things that you can do with your fingers, right? So things that you can manipulate. A lot of kids like to just manipulate like clay or Play-Doh, right? So just that manipulation sort of thing can be a useful tool. And by manipulation, I don't mean changing someone's behavior, but I mean that you're manipulating the clay, you're manipulating the paper, whatever it may be. That may be something that works. So playing with a favorite toy, it kind of overlaps with activities. This is sometimes a little bit inappropriate to separate these out, but we just do have these general categories. And then you have professional and social reinforcers. That's pretty straightforward. Obviously, the social stuff is obvious. Access to friends, access to family, or even access to, we used to use chat rooms a lot, not so popular anymore, but maybe Facebook is reinforcing. That's both an activity and it's social. So who knows? Professional stuff, feedback from colleagues or whatever the case may be. So we've got a lot of different reinforcer classes or groups of reinforcers that are available. The trick is that you have to figure out which one of those you want to try and use. And as you're working with your own behavior, for this self-change project, you want to identify the things that you like. So the easy way for me to tell you to identify your reinforcers is come up with a list of the things that you like. Food, activities, and then professional and social type of stuff. You can leave the manipulative out for your thing, for your behavior, unless it's something that's really obvious to you. But it can be a bit more of a challenge to think of the manipulative ones, at least for our own behaviors. You get kids that are autistic or something like that, and manipulative things may be very useful. But again, I tend to think that's part of the activity category. So, let's see what's next. Motivating operations. Here we go. Motivating operations. Now, I'm going to violate my own rule here a little bit. I just told you that that in reality that behavior is this three-term contingency. There's a discriminative stimulus, there is a response, and then there's a consequence for that response, which is reinforcing or punishing or something like that. But what we've got here is we're saying that there might be something else to that. We have to think of the things that motivate people, right? So a motivating operation is something that simply changes the value of a reinforcing stimulus. So you can either increase the value of a reinforcer, or you can decrease the value of a reinforcer. And you guys may be already picking up on where I'm going with this. So again, slide here saying change the frequency of behavior that has been reinforced by those particular stimuli. That's what we're doing with reinforcement in general is changing the frequency of behavior, right? But what we have in order to achieve those particular goals is, again, using these criteria, these things called motivating operations. You might notice I'm having a hard time talking about this, and that's because I actually learned this in a different way. I learned these as all being called establishing operations, and nowadays they split those into, they put establishing operations under something called a motivating operation, and you also have something called an abolishing operation. So establishing operations are going to strengthen the value of a reinforcer, right? So it's going to be more effective at changing behavior. Okay? That's what an establishing operation is. So establishing operations are most easily done by withholding access to a reinforcer. So think about it in terms of M&Ms. I'm an M&M freak. I love them. So if I eat them all the time, they're not going to be as important to me. Right? But if I only eat them once in a while, or if growing up my parents only gave them to me once in a while, that increases the value of those things. right? So if you always have your treats, right, then they're not going to be as valuable to you. So an establishing operation is about making something more valuable. The easiest way to do that is withhold access to that thing. Right? We're going to come back and hit this issue when we talk about self-management, because that's the real problem with self-management, is really managing your motivating operations and managing your access to your reinforcers. But so again, if you're trying to control someone else's behavior, modify someone else's behavior, and you're saying, all right, I think this person really likes playing, I don't know, the PlayStation, right? So how can you use that as a reinforcer? Well, you can reduce the amount that they have access to that PlayStation, right? So now you've automatically made the PlayStation more valuable because they're not able to do it all the time. So that then, when they do a behavior that you want them to do, you can then give them access to the PlayStation, and that is going to make, hopefully reinforce whatever behavior it is that they did in order to get that PlayStation. Right? And that's that contingency part right there, the get part. You have to do the behavior in order to get the reinforcer. Right? So if I'm wanting a kid to do his homework or something, then you may say, all right, you only get access to your PlayStation after you've achieved your homework, after you've completed all your homework for the day. Okay, so again, you have to then be able to control access to that PlayStation. Right? That's one of the ways that this can backfire on you, is if you don't have control over the PlayStation. But if you do have control over the PlayStation, then you can say you can only access it when you complete your homework. Right? And then even then for a limited time. Right? Because now you're making sure that you're keeping the motivating value of that reinforcer up. So you're establishing the effectiveness of the reinforcer, hence the term establishing operation. The other one is an abolishing operation. All right, pretty straightforward, you can imagine that we're going to reduce the effectiveness of a reinforcer. Oftentimes this is done by flooding. Okay, so giving somebody unfettered access to the reinforcer. So you got your PlayStation all the time, you can use it whenever the heck you want, so now using that as a reinforcer is probably not going to be as effective as what it used to be, all right, or what it could be if you limit the access to it. So abolishing operations, again, give somebody access to something, a lot of it. And let's think about an application of this. If in the classroom, a lot of times kids are reinforced by attention. Right? And if the kid isn't getting much attention, it's going to be a very reinforcing thing. Now, if the kid's engaging in inappropriate behavior, right, and that's the only time that they get attention, then you can imagine that it's not going that inappropriate behavior is going to be reinforced by that attention, right? But if you start to give them a lot of attention for other things, for positive behavior, for whatever, as long as it's not that inappropriate behavior, now you're decreasing the effectiveness of that attention. You're going to need to do something else, but likely it won't be as effective at maintaining that inappropriate behavior anymore. So what we've really done is changed the three-term contingency here to a four-term contingency. So we have EOs and AOs up front, or if you want, just to make it short, MOs. Motivating operations are up front. They happen before this other stuff. Now, the arrow here points directly to the SD. I don't really like that so much. I think I should probably change this and say that the EO-AO should point to the reinforcer right here. Okay. Why? Well, simply because these things affect the value of this. Right? They make that work better or not work as well. Right? So in a sense, it doesn't really point here, but they do happen beforehand. So in terms of time, this is the way it works. But what does it affect? It affects that stimulus out there. Right? Using reinforcement. All right, reinforcer size. Size is important, usually, but not always. As you increase the size of the reinforcer, it maintains more behavior. You give somebody more money, all right, surprise, surprise, generally speaking, they're going to be more reinforced. More money will maintain more responses. So if you've got a job and they're wanting you to do a lot of work, they better pay you accordingly. Right? That's a really simple example of that one. If this class, for example, hopefully the reinforcer size, there's a lot of opportunity to earn points. There's a lot of opportunity to get a good grade in this class, and that's the idea here, that I'm asking you to do a lot of work, but you're getting a lot of reinforcers as a result. Hopefully even the lectures, or not just the lectures, but the in-class stuff is reinforcing all of this particular work that I'm asking you to do outside of the class. So that's kind of what's going on here. I'm using a lot of reinforcement in order to maintain a lot of behavior. You do have to watch out for satiation, and for those of you that don't recall what satiation is, it's just getting full. All right, so getting full of a reinforcer. So you can think about food, right? So if I am reinforcing a kiddo with food or M&Ms, it's possible that they're going to get full. Now that decreases the value of a reinforcer. So satiation, okay, directly goes back to abolishing operations. So if you satiate someone, then you're going to abolish it. You have an abolishing operation. If you deprive someone, then you have an establishing operation. So again, if we watch out for satiation here, if you give them too much, then it's no longer reinforcing. Think about somebody that's got, like, I don't know, $1 billion in the bank. No longer is $50,000 reinforcing to somebody that has $1 billion in the bank. Why? They're satiated. They've had enough of it, so to speak. I mean, obviously they're still going to try and get more, but the idea is that it's not nearly as effective as a reinforcer for somebody like, I don't know, probably one of us in the classroom that don't have that $1 billion in the bank account. So that $50,000 will be very reinforcing for us. We haven't satiated on it yet. Use rules with regard to reinforcement. What behavior, all right, do you want in order to reinforce it? And this makes working with people a lot easier, and I mean a lot easier. With humans, typically we're verbal, right? So you can use these types of instructions. It's not necessary. We do this stuff all the time with people that are nonverbal, and you don't have to say what your rules are. But it is nice to do that if you have the opportunity, especially if you have somebody that is verbal and they can either read the rules or whatever. I'm thinking back to second grade now. We had a teacher. Or my teacher in second grade, she had a thing on the wall that was warm fuzzies and cold pricklies, right? So you were to give warm fuzzies and you were not to give cold pricklies. And she would reinforce you if she caught you giving warm fuzzies and basically saying nice things to people. But if you were being nasty, then she would give you a little timeout or do something along those lines. So so she posted those rules on the wall, and I still to this day can remember the poster about what a warm fuzzy looks like and what a cold prickly looks like. So because it was just a cutout of a piece of paper. But anyway, she was using those rules. Instructions are good. That way everybody knew what was going on, knew what was expected of them, and knew what they'd get as a result. Okay? So rules do speed up the learning process. Again, we're all talking about somebody here that's verbal, that can either understand verbal commands or understand written commands. So that's the only situation where rules are really useful. Again, like I said above, it's not necessary. I mean, we do this stuff with animals, that they're obviously not verbal. They're not able to read what we're asking them. They're not going to be able to follow a particular rule. Excuse me. Well, that's pretty much it for that one. I think. Oh no, I got one more. Yeah, placeholders for the delay to reinforcement. We're going to talk about this in much more detail as we go on later in the quarter. But oftentimes rules are simply placeholders. Right? I'm saying that I know I'm going to get a reinforcer because the rule says I am, and that can be sort of I don't know how do you put it. That just being able to recite that rule to yourself is it will bridge that gap to reinforcement. And we're going to talk about immediate reinforcement, how that's much more effective than delayed reinforcement, and this helps you bridge that gap. Okay? Because you can't always reinforce everybody right away, even though you'd like to. That would be the ideal situation. This often happens with regard to work, right? So with work, you have a clear rule. You know when you're getting paid. So you're not getting a reinforcer immediately for doing your work. Your pay is delayed by a couple of weeks, or maybe 3 weeks, even if 4 weeks if you're on a monthly type payment system. So you oftentimes just tell yourself, hey, I know I'm getting paid, I'm earning this much money, whatever it may be, right? So, but that's that placeholder. That's until that reinforcer comes, and those are important to do, and that's one of the utilities of rules. And I'm remembering back here to what was it? Several years ago when I was going through basic training, there's a lot of boring stuff in the military. I mean, boring. You sit in, the term we always use is hurry up and wait, right? So you got to hurry up and wait. And I remember going through basic at Great Lakes and over by Chicago, and we were sitting there. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were sitting in line for several hours, and just sitting in line, that tells you how long you had to wait. Not even standing in line. So you're just sitting there forever out of some medical thing or something. Who knows? And as we're sitting there, one of the guys behind me, he taps me on the shoulder because we weren't really supposed to be talking to each other, and he leans up and he says, "Hey, we're getting paid." And it was true. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes waiting worth it, right? Because the whole time we're sitting there, we're getting paid. We're getting a paycheck. It's not like you're doing nothing. You're waiting. You're actively waiting, and you're getting paid for that. So instead of getting frustrated at the fact we had to wait for so darn long, we started to realize, hey, we're getting, we applied the rule and realized that we're getting paid. So hey, that's that placeholder. The reinforcer did come eventually. It was a paycheck. So. All right, that's it for this slide set. I've got these credits on here, but I always put those on there just so everybody knows where I got the pictures from. So yeah, we'll see you, or you'll hear me again soon, and I will see you in class very soon. So hope you enjoyed the first lecture, and this is pretty much the pace that I'll use at all lectures. Sometimes I'll speed up, sometimes I'll slow down a little bit, but I'll try to give an example for everything. But and then there you go.